Hello and welcome to the first of our lessons on looking at using event procedures as a trigger for your macro or your procedure. So we started looking at this really on our previous section on user forms, where for the first time in this course we started looking at more natural ways of triggering your procedures as opposed to somebody clicking a button on the toolbar or on the ribbon. So we started to look at things like forms being initialized and kind of form controls losing focus and these kind of things, more natural stuff that's happening and behind the scenes procedures will begin running. So we're going to look at I believe 4 or 5 different examples in this section, and for the first one we're going to look at the opening of a workbook, a classic event procedure. And in this example, when somebody opens this workbook, what we want to do is we want to make sure that the user is taken to the update worksheet and that the cell selected is cell A2. So a nice easy thing, it's just going to ensure that it always opens on that sheet and that cell, because that's the most logical place somebody wants to be, really. Just like when you start up an email, you know, your cursor will be flashing in the to field. That's probably where you want to be first. It's quite logical that you're going to put the recipient address first. But when we do something like forward an email, they put the cursor in the body of the message, because that's probably where you want to be. It might not be. You might want to add another recipient address. Who knows? But that's probably a fair shout, and it's trying to save you time. So that's our example here anyhow. So what we're going to do is pop to our Visual Basic editor, and what I should do really, I guess, is back on my spreadsheet before we get going, I should pop back to the inventory sheet and click somewhere on there. So that's kind of forced area that I was in. And back to our editor. So here's a procedure that we created earlier. It's one of our previous projects, this at one of its stages. What I'm going to look at though is I'm not concerned by that right now. I'm going to the this workbook object over in our project explorer here, and I'm going to double click on this workbook. Now, it's been a long time since we did stuff like that. We were talking about this really early in the course where we mentioned the project explorer, and I'm hopefully mentioned at that point that you'd only really go into a worksheet or workbook object when you want to associate a procedure with one of its events. So when I double click on this workbook, I can see on my title bar at the top that it's in the code for this workbook. I've got a module that looks like any other module, with option explicit along the top. But along the top we have these 2 drop-down lists. And for the first drop-down list, I'm going to choose Workbook. Not that I've got much option there. And in the second drop-down list, I've now got a list of procedures. And the default procedure for a workbook is the workbook open procedure. But this drop-down list gives me a lot more scope for choice here. And we're going to look at a couple more of these before we finish with workbook events. But the workbook open is actually the one I'm after right now, the workbook open event. And on opening, I want to say sheets, and I can't remember what it's called. I think it was called update, but check that before I do it. Dot select, and I'm going to say ranger A2 dot select. It's nice and easy. No award-winning code in there. But we're asking it to select that sheet and select that cell based on the workbook open event procedure. So if I close down that editor, and before I look at saving and closing, I'll double check that is update. I'm confident it's A2. So I'm going to save this file and close it down. And I'm going to look at reopening it. It'll be in my recent list, workbook open. And I'll enable content. It's always a bit of a pain with event procedures. Let's just take me to that other sheet, but It's looking for me to enable content. If I click enable content, it then takes me to the update sheet and to that cell. Now, we also spoke about macro security on kind of that note earlier in the course as well. And it's not a position for me to say, you know, we can enable macros automatically and we wouldn't have got that message. But obviously that's a security issue. And especially if you're working in a business, that's certainly not for me to say. That'll be IT's call really, and the policies within your company, as macros could potentially contain malicious code. But as soon as we enable that content anyhow, our workbook open event is kind of triggered and it does the job we want. Which I say, nothing amazing here, just takes us to that cell on that sheet, but it's an example of running one of your sub-procedures off of an event, one of the workbook events in this example. Hello and welcome to this lesson where we start to look at the workbook before save event procedure. And in this example, what we want to do is, I've got this really basic spreadsheet on screen that's got an ID in cell B1. And just an example, we can relate to this however we wish, but I want to make sure that before somebody saves a file, they must have changed this ID. I want to make sure that this is changed from the moment somebody opened the file to the moment that they save that file. They can't save it without changing that. So into the Visual Basic editor. Once again, I'm going to double click on the This Workbook object, and I'm going to start up the event procedures for that workbook. So following on the previous video there, but this time I'm going to choose the before save. I said, didn't I? Before save event procedure. So I'm going to choose before save. And now I have it. So the before save event procedure appears, and it appears above workbook open. Mentioned in the previous lesson that workbook open is the default event procedure for the workbook. Now, if we didn't want that, I could just select that and press delete. There's no harm in it being there, apart from it, makes it look a bit untidy and is kind of cluttering things up, and we could just remove it. However, we need it. We are going to need the workbook open event as well, because what we want is we want to make sure that the moment the workbook is opened, we need to capture the contents of cell B1, the ID, in a variable, so that the moment somebody saves the workbook, we can test it and see, has this changed since they opened the workbook? So we're going to need that in there. But first of all, we need a variable. And this variable needs to be available to both procedures. So I'm going to put it outside of the procedures and at the top of the module. So another thing, it's been a while since we spoke about this in our working with variables section of the course. We spoke about variable scope. This variable needs to be available to both procedures, so it's going at the top, and I'm going to put dim, and I'm going to call it version number, as, and I guess I should put long in case it gets quite large. And then in the workbook open event, I'm going to say version number equals, and I'll put range, B1 dot value. To keep things easy here, we're going to assign the contents of B1 to the variable version number, which will be available to it because that is available across this module. Okay, now in the before save event procedure, I'm going to declare another variable, which I'm going to call a new version number. New version number. I have that as long. And I'm going to assign the current contents B1 to it. And this is maybe a bit unnecessary, but I wanted to throw this in as we put one variable module wide. I wanted to have another one that's just local. This is procedural level. I'm going to say new version number equals, and it's probably going to moan when I click away, it does, but I'm going to nick that little line there. Super. So now we can test and say if version number, don't know why I wrote NO for one and number for the other one, just to make this awkward. If version number equals new version number, then, now if they're the same, that means that somebody didn't change it. Since the moment they opened it and the moment they saved it, they have not changed that version number. So I need to take some action on that. What I'm going to do is cancel the save. Don't save it then. Tell the user they haven't changed it and abort the save. Force them to do it. Now we notice one of the reasons I'm going for this before save event procedure here is to show that we've got some arguments to deal with. We've got one that is save as UI as Boolean. And we've got another one that's cancel as Boolean. I wasn't going to worry about the save as UI for now, but I was going to use the cancel. So it's providing us with this parameter. They're saying, look, if you want to cancel the save event, it's a Boolean value. So it cannot be either true or false. So I'm going to put MSG box, you have not, dear me, changed the version number. And I should correct my U there. And then we're going to put cancel equals true. So I'm manipulating the parameter that they have supplied. I'm going to say set cancel to true, so do cancel this. Now I don't have to put an else statement because otherwise it will just continue with the save. Now it'll perform this action anyhow, it will continue with the save. So this is an example of using the before save event procedure, but also manipulating some of these parameters, which is a little relatively new to us here. So right, let's close down this editor and give this a go. So yes, I'm going to look at saving this file. Let's save that, and it's quite happy for me to do so because I typed that in, that 112, since I opened this workbook. So if I close it down, it's okay. And if I reopen it, the moment I open this workbook and enable content, it will trigger the workbook open event. So now it's made a note of the contents of B1. So if I don't change this and I go to save the file, I now get this message saying you have not changed the version number. And if I click OK, it refuses to save my file. I can see that by if I save again, it continues to moan. So if I change it to 113 and then look at saving, it's happy for me to do so. I can now go to close. So it's an example of running events there on the before save, procedures on the before save event. We could have added more to say, make sure it's kind of incremented by one, and obviously there's a lot of scope for what procedures they can be. We can't be all day showing every single possible example. Okay, next up we're going to look at our last workbook event procedure, which is going to be inserting a new sheet to a book. Hello and welcome to this lesson where we look at the new sheet event procedure for the workbook object. So just rattling through some different examples of event procedures here so we get a good look and feel of them. And in this example, it's the event of somebody inserting a new sheet. However they go about it, whether they click this button at the bottom or whether they go through like the insert drop down and choose insert sheet, however they get it to happen, this event will run. So into the editor, and it's this workbook object again. So we'll double click on the workbook object to pop up in the module window. We'll choose Workbook from the first list. That will open up the Workbook Open default event, which I don't want, so I'm going to delete it. But it's completely harmless. I could leave it there. Oop, let's delete it after the next one goes in. But I'll also get this big drop down list of procedures. And the last one at this workbook level is going to be this new sheet. So just, as I say, make a note that there are a lot more events in there. We've got before close, before print, the activating of the workbook. Some good stuff here. Mentioning the opening. Got loads of pivot table stuff here, which is pretty handy. Lots of good stuff. Sheet change when somebody moves from one sheet to another. Lots of good stuff. Okay, we're going for new sheet. And then I'm going to delete this workbook open event. Right, and all we want to do is when somebody inserts a new sheet, we want to prompt them to put a name for the sheet. So we're almost kind of forcing them to name sheets. Now once again, like the previous lesson, they have provided an object for us called SH. So they're saying this event will run on the insert of a new sheet, and that new sheet is known as SH. So if you want to do something to the sheet, refer to it as SH. Sounds brilliant. What I'm going to do is say SH then, and it's as an object, so it will act as that worksheet. It will have all the properties and methods of a worksheet, or of a sheet really, not just a worksheet. I'm going to put sh.name. I want to name the sheet, sh.name equals, and I'm going to go for the input box to prompt the user to type something in. So sh.name equals input box, and I'm going to say please enter a name for the new sheet, and I'll provide a title which I'll call sheet name, and that is that. Once again, you know, we can stick in some error handling issues and that. What if they cancel the input box and this kind of stuff that we spoke about throughout the course. I'm not planning on continually regurgitating that stuff as we go through. I want to cut out some of the, you know, it's not nonsense, but cut out some of the kind of extras here because we've kind of been there and done that. And I'll leave that to yourself to add if you want to try and deal with any potential user errors or behaviour at this point. For us right now, I'm just going to close down this editor and test it out by inserting a new sheet. And it immediately pops up an input box, prompting me for the name, so I can put that I want to call it Fred, and click OK, and I've got a new sheet called Fred. And if I maybe do it this way, just to demonstrate other ways, the event will run, or I'll call this one Sally, and I've got a new sheet called Sally. So, yeah, a third example of an event procedure there, this one running on the inserting of a new sheet. Hello and welcome to this lesson where we look at our first worksheet event procedure. So we've just seen some events that we can run off a workbook, such as opening of the book or the saving of the book. Now we're going to look at a couple of different worksheet events to get a feel for what's out there. And this first lesson we're going to look at the selection change event. So when a user clicks or selects a different cell on a sheet, for that to be the trigger of our macro. And in this example, what I wanted to do is to apply some formatting to the entire row of the cell that the user selects. It's working on the idea that you might have a large spreadsheet of data. When you click a cell, especially far out here, by highlighting the whole row, it makes it easier for you to see the other values on that row, which otherwise might not be very clear to you. So that's our goal. So let's go to our code, as we do. As we come in here, you can see that I'm in module 1 at the moment. We're in this module, and we already have some code. Now what happened is this was recorded. What I did is I started up the macro recorder, I selected a row, and I applied
some formatting to it so that I could capture the code I wanted for that, style of colour and border, because I don't know that VBA off the top of my head. So this is where the macro recorder really comes in handy. We had a section right at the start of the course for using the macro recorder, and I said it's always there for you. You're not going to know every little bit of code, but you can record yourself doing stuff and capture it and then adapt it to your needs. And that's what we want to do. I've added these comments in myself, and I might have tweaked 1 or 2 bits to tidy it up, but it's pretty much as it was after recording in this sub procedure. So we've got the applying of the colour, applying of the borders, top and bottom border, and then I've also got myself removing it, so applying a no fill colour and removing the border as well. Now what I'm going to need to do is cut and paste that into our event procedure. So I'm going to select all of this code. I'll have all of that. Thank you, macro recorder. I'm going to cut it. I'm going to move into sheet 1. The plan is to apply this to sheet 1 and start up an event procedure like we did in the previous lessons. So I'm going to choose the worksheet object, and then we get this list of events from the drop down list to the right. The default event is selection change, which is the one that I'm after. So I'm going to leave it as that. We're going to see one more of these events before the end of this course. That's our plan. But just make a note of some of the other beautiful events that are in there and that you might need. Okay, let's paste them nuggets of code in here. So we're going to be running it off our sheet event instead. I'll go back to that module and delete that sub procedure. Thank you, but don't need you anymore. Okay, so within our recording, it is applying this colouring and stuff to the selection, and that's not going to be quite good enough. That's because I selected a cell and then I did it. So when I said I tidied stuff up, one of the things was rows 6.select. That was kind of there before. And then with selection, we want to say with the row the user has currently clicked on. Now, a good thing for us is in the selection change event procedure, like 1 or 2 of the previous procedures, they have supplied a parameter for us. This is right, the cell that the user has selected, it is known as target, and the data is stored as range. And if you want to use this, which you probably do if you're doing this event procedure, refer to it as target. Okay, sounds like a fantastic plan. I'm going to create a variable. So I'm going to do within this procedure, I'm going to call it dim rownum as long, and then I'm going to assign that to it. I'm going to say rownum equals target.row. Capture the row that of the cell that the user selected, or whether they selected, they might have selected a row for all I know. So that's known as target.row, the row of the target. Assign it to a variable called rownum, so that then instead of selection in each of these little with constructs, I can put rows, the plural, open bracket, rows, or row index, rownum. So I'm going to copy and paste it in now. So I'm saying with that row, do the formatting. Let's have it in there and have it in there. So with that row, do the formatting. So they supplied a parameter. I've captured it in a variable. I could have used it straight in there, really. Don't need the variable, but you'll see that I'm planning on using it for 1 or 2 other things. So for ease of use, I've decided to use a variable and then refer to it. Okay, so that should be doing a job. What we've got to think though is when a user selects a cell, they will be leaving a previous selection. And the reason I recorded myself using no fill is that when a user clicks a cell, we've got to apply the formatting to the cell they've selected, but we also have to remove the formatting from the previous selected cell. I was just going to get loads of coloured rows. It's not going to be the currently active cell, is it? Active row. So, I'm going to go and declare another variable. Now for this variable, I'm going to need it to be available within this sheet procedure, but also elsewhere. So I'm going to need this module. If I want to create a public variable that's available to any sub-procedure, user form, event procedure, it needs to be declared in a standard module. I can't declare it within these sheet objects or book objects or user form objects. So I'm going to, at the top of this, put public to make it available throughout this project. I'm going to call it previous row as long, so that we have this variable called previous row that's going to be publicly available. So back into our sheet procedure, what I want to do is when a user very first opens up the book, they're going to think kind of like the cell that they've got selected is going to be applied, and then when they click a different cell, it's going to apply it. So it needs to run at least once first of all. They open the book and it applies the formatting. But then once they've applied that formatting, I need to capture what the previous row is. I need to capture what it is at the moment. So when they select again, I then have the previous row. Now I'm going to put this after the fill colour and that. I'm going to have that previous row equals target.row. Or to be honest, equals row num. So the currently active one. And then where we've got this colour, what I need to do is I need to say, if before we get to that point, previous row and row num are the same thing, then this must be the first instance when a user opens up the sheet, because I haven't had the opportunity to select a different cell as yet. I only want to apply the fill colour if they're different. So it means they've moved. So hopefully this is making sense. It's not making a great deal of sense in my head right now. But to get a code on the screen, it'll be clearer. If previous row is not equal to row num, then remove the fill colour and remove the border. End if, and then capture the current row number in previous row. So the next time they select, we can apply it to the row num, and it will have the correct one here because of the assignment at the top. If they're not the same, remove the colour and assign the next active row number to it. Okay, so I'm pretty confident that's going to be doing a job for us. Oh, scrolling up and down, noticed it. Selection object. Hopefully you guys noticed that before me. I don't know. We're referencing this as previous row now. The one I want to remove is going to be rows previous row. Remove the formatting from the previous selection. Rows previous row. Previous row. Okay. One last thing. When a user opens up this book, we need to capture the previous row then as well. So the very first different selection they make. Because at the moment we're only capturing the previous row after that first selection. So we're going to be one step behind. If you ran this through, if you demonstrate this stuff, you would see it. So let's have a look actually. Let's do that. Let's save this, what we've got. And let's have a look at how it's working. Let's close our editor down. Mistype. Hopefully you guys notice that too. I need an S on the end of my rows there. Let's give that another go. Let's save and close. See what we got. Ooh, didn't expect that one. I can see the selection, which is good. What doesn't it like? Which road on interior? Okay, yes, that is our problem. We haven't assigned a previous row as yet because it happens afterwards. So that's what I'm after. I can see the selection taking place, and it's a beautiful selection, isn't it? I can see it working, and if I clicked again, it would moan again. But if I pop back to the sheet, it's doing it, but it's not removing the previous selection because it hasn't had an opportunity to capture that information yet. So I'm going to reset this project. I'm going to save that, and we're going to go for a workbook object. I'm going to go this workbook. Let's double click and start up the workbook open event. So we've already spoke about this one, and in here I'm going to say that what am I going to say? I'm going to say previous row, which is why we made it a public variable, equals active cell.row. I can't use target because that parameter is not available to me here. So I need another way of capturing the row that the user is currently in. And fortunately, we've got this beaut called active cell that we know we can use. So where's the row of the active cell? Assign it to previous row. Right, let's have a look now. Save this. And I'm going to close it all down and reopen it. So the workbook open event is triggered and it captures that information. Should have removed these colorings actually. Let's do that. Let's select that, remove all that stuff, and let's save and close again. Let's have a proper example of this. Close it, open it up. Okay, here we go. So I click on a cell, assigns the color. Click a different cell, and now it's moving. Look at that. Only highlighting the currently selected row. So we open the workbook, captures the row that I'm currently in as a previous row, but also assigns the colouring. As soon as I click on a different cell, target is used to capture that row. I have the check in the code, don't we? We have that check to see, like, are you the same as previous row? If it's the very first time you run it, it's been used by the workbook open event. If they're not the same, it will remove it. And then is assigned whether the row number is then. So it all becomes a bit of a mismatch. It can be a bit foggy till you kind of run this through. But it's an example of a selection change event. The main thing we're covering at this part of the course, because we've done a lot of coding already by this point, so hopefully this is getting clearer to us. But it's triggering procedures and macros off of these natural events, and you'll have needs to do that. As a byproduct of this, I'm trying to recap on different codings we've done. Active cell coming up again here. The declaration of variables at both procedure level and project level. The importance of recording code and writing comments. Again and again, we're hopefully getting very familiar with this code. We're coming to the end of this course now, so just making sure that we're getting very familiar with this. Hello and welcome to this lesson where we are going to look at the change event procedure. So it's another worksheet object event procedure, and what it's used for is that we can trigger a procedure or a macro off the changing of a particular, like a value in a particular cell. So our example here is somebody's going to type in some marks, like some kind of grade or something, and if the mark entered is 3 or less, then we're going to prompt the user to input a comment. So they have to kind of explain why the evaluation was so low, if it's kind of 3 or under. So just a pretend example of kind of triggering code when somebody changes the contents of a cell. Essentially, when somebody changes the contents of a cell, we're going to check to see what they put and essentially run that event. So, into our code, one thing that's done already is we've created a user form. User form called reason, which we want to use that to capture the comments, the explanation as to why the mark was so low. So it's got a simple little user form here, with an OK button and a big text box. Text box named txt reason, the Hungarian notation there, txt reason. Okay, so let's pop to our sheet 1 object and go into our worksheet object where the default event of selection change appears, and we're going to change that to a procedure simply called change. So rather than changing the selection, it's a change to the cell's content. So I'm going to choose change and then remove selection change. Okay, not that it was doing any harm. Okay, so now we've got the worksheet change. Once again, it's supplying us with target as a range. So a parameter for target where we can see what cell did the user just change. We need to make sure that the cell that was changed is column A. We're just focusing on column A. Was it column A? And was it less than or equal to 3? In that case, show that user form so that they can input that comment, input that code. And then we're going to put the details in the cell to the right. So the first thing I'm actually going to do is we need to create a public variable again. I want to create a public variable which is going to be a range variable that's going to grab the target range, so that when we go to the user form and run code from the user form, I know what the range was. Otherwise, when we come outside of this procedure, we won't be able to use target anymore. So I'm going to need to capture that in memory so that I can use it outside of this event procedure. And like we saw in the previous lesson, I will need to create a standard module because I want this variable to be public, so I can declare it in here. I need to put it in a standard module so it's available to both the event procedure and the event procedure for the OK button in that user form. So public RNG is range in that standard procedure. So then back into our sheet 1, the first thing I'm going to do when that was changed is say set RNG equals target. So assign the range of target to RNG so that then I can use it. And I can say something like, if RNG dot column is equal to 1, so if it was in column A, and RNG dot value is less than or equal to 3, then. So only run this code if the column was column 1, if it's in column A, and the value is 3 or less. And what I want to do is open up that user form. It's called frm reason dot show. So a recap on our user form section there. Display the user form. Okay, so let's go back to our user form. Into our user form, go into the OK button to trigger the event procedure for the OK button. And now we need to put whatever information they've typed into that comments box into the cell to the right of the target, which we now know as RNG. So I'm going to say RNG dot offset 0 rows but 1 column dot value equals txt reason, I think it was. Struggling there. Let me quickly double check that. txt reason. That's okay. Where am I? OK button. Okay. So one cell off of the target, which we assign to RNG. Display the contents of txt reason. And then unload me. So close the form down. Unload me. Right then. So if I was to close down this code window, at the moment if I clicked on a different cell, nothing happens. That's a selection change. If I input something, if I put 6 in, nothing happens. If I put 2 in, triggers the user form, because that was in column A, in column 1, but it was also less than or equal to 3. So I have to explain itself. Why would I pick something I can't type? Punctuality. Punctuality. I know that's wrong. Was poor. I should put spelling is poor. Right, there we go. That's why we give it a low mark. We click OK, and it is displayed in the cell to the right. Okay, now what happens if another type of change is to select them cells and delete them? And now we've got a type mismatch. So any change to the cell contents of column A will trigger this event. That includes things like deleting the contents. Now you know your spreadsheet's better than me, and I don't know how likely that is to happen. I guess it's fairly likely. There's always a chance somebody's going to delete values. Come on. But I'll get a runtime error. So we can do our error handling stuff, all that jazz is brilliant. I'm going to go into debug, and what I'm going to do to handle that in the sheet event procedure, below that assignment, is just put another if statement. I'm going to say if rng dot value equals nothing. If it equals nothing, then they must have deleted stuff. Now there may be more errors that we have to cater for than just this, but this is I guess a fairly simple one to handle. I'm just going to exit the sub procedure if that's the case. So just quickly with statements go, if the cell's empty, they must have deleted stuff. No need to go any further, and exit sub and end if. Yeah. Maybe we could put an else statement in here, because if it was anything else than that, then do this instead. There are many ways of handling this stuff. I wanted to target the use of somebody deleting there. If I close this down and we check that out again, so let's just delete that. That's column B anyway, so there's no harm there. 7, 1, event procedure. Something was not good. Click OK. Jobs are good, and delete stuff. Quite happy with me to do that now. So there we go. They change event procedure. In my experience, probably a little bit more popular than this selection change event procedure, despite that being the default. Running code off the user changing the contents of a cell. Very good. Possibly the most popular worksheet event procedure on my experience. But an event procedure like any other, and we've used it to check what was changed. This thing very popular. You may come across things like the intersect method and other ways of checking that the cells a user changed. The target is what you're monitoring first of all, then check exactly what they did to it and then do something about it. In this case, display a form and enter some comments. Okay, I hope that concludes the end of our section on event procedures. So I hope you find that useful. Triggering code off natural events, really good stuff to know.